development. So some really interesting stuff. We've got our own register. Actually, 88 universities are on the apprenticeship register. A lot of debate about that, existing providers, new providers, all very similar that we're having to deal with. You might have seen at the end of last week a big news item around the numbers dropping by 60%. There are a whole range of reasons. I normally talk for sort of half an hour to an hour, and I've got 10 minutes, so I won't go through the detail. But there are issues around the 20% off the job training, how employers are being asked to fund apprenticeships, the non-levy employers, and the whole tender process, which any of you that are going through at the moment. I don't know. Is anyone here on the apprenticeship register? So a small smattering, possibly because they've heard how bad it is, the rest. But no, it's a real challenge, and it's a real challenge of a new system. But I did think I should just talk through what's going on and what the opportunity is and how it meshes in with the rest of further education and higher education. And when you read that there aren't that many degree and higher level apprenticeships, one is because they're new and there actually aren't any standards at the moment, and if the IFA actually got their act together and approved a few standards, then people would start delivering them. So actually there's a big pent-up demand and supply ready to charge in to the degree and higher level apprenticeship sector. It's the approval process for getting the actual standards, the curriculum, the assessment approved that's causing most of the delay at the moment. So just quickly, the opportunity and degree higher apprenticeships, why wouldn't you? I was talking to a group of engineering employers and I said, well, why would I advise someone to go to university rather than do a degree apprenticeship? They couldn't give me an answer. For many, many sectors, actually they've been waiting for the opportunity to take individuals on into a job, they're paying them, no student debt, and those individuals are getting a degree at the end of 3 years as well as earning. One engineering, I think it was BAE, was taking his third-year student around to schools who was saying, at the end of this third year, I'm going to be earning £37,000 and have a degree and be in a job. The KPMG degree apprentice I was talking to, the best bit about his job is when all the graduates come in and he's managing them, and he's the apprentice. So, you know, there's a shift going on, and I think it is a massive game changer in the education sector, particularly at the higher level. We have big issues, big concerns about actually all the funding shifting to the higher level and leaving behind the level 2, level 3, which is so important. I was talking to a university conference last week, and they were all saying, oh, it's great, we don't need these level 2 apprenticeships, they're not important. So I just said, when they're all sitting in care homes, wondering where all their care workers are because there's been no level 2 and level 3 care training, then maybe they'll just rethink that focus. But it is a big issue about covering enough funding for everything. There's £2.5 billion coming into the apprenticeship levy. I don't think it will take much once the universities get going, once the large employers start thinking about degree apprenticeships, management training, that at least half of that money will go. Why? And the individuals, the parents be thinking, why am I putting an individual into a degree course where only half are getting into graduate jobs and there's no guarantee of jobs and they've got debt? Why am I doing that when they could be going into a job straight away with the training? Now, there are lots of arguments about different routes, but you can see that of the £10 billion that's spent on HE fees at the moment, a big chunk of that could actually be going to degree apprenticeships. I think there's going to be a massive shift that we'll be seeing, and it's amazing. 15% of large employers, the levy-paying employers, were engaged in apprenticeships. There's about 20,000 levy-paying employers. 15% were engaged. There's 50% registered to deliver apprenticeships already since May. The top 400 levy payers are paying half the levy. The top 1,700 are paying 75% of the levy. There's some big companies there with big levies that are looking at how they'll spend their money, and big opportunities in all sectors, but particularly higher education as well. the debate about being, the prescribed HE, non-prescribed HE, a lot of the apprenticeships, the new apprenticeships, are actually the sort of more non-prescribed. They're not requiring degrees in. Some have got degrees embedded in, and some haven't. And there's a big debate at the moment of where this should end. But there are great opportunities for providers that don't have the ability to award degrees to actually be delivering higher education. And that's an opportunity for everyone in this room, but it was also a threat because there are other providers looking at how they can do this. Chartered Management of Institute is having a field day at the moment. Everyone wants to deliver management apprenticeships. It doesn't require a degree. It is their own qualification. So some real shifting around there. And we're seeing interesting partnerships developing as well, because if a levy employer is saying, actually, I want just one prime provider to work with me, but I want all the way from level 2, GCSE level, all the way up to level 7 being delivered in my organisation. Not one provider, across sectors often as well, not one provider can do all of that. So we are seeing some interesting relationships develop between providers. And I think what we're seeing is a big shift to much larger independent training providers. Our members, our larger members, are out every day with employers bidding for work, millions of pounds worth of levy work every day. We're seeing the universities move in, and already they've got relationships with employers, and a lot of those employers are saying, we're not paying your fees anymore. You've got to find a way of switching your offer into something where we can use our levy, because we're already having to pay millions of pounds worth of levy. I'm not paying anything on top. And I think we'll see that happening much more. Big, large independents and universities or HEIs or however you want to describe it. The colleges, I think, are going to suffer. I've been a college principal and I know the challenge of working with employers in sort of those sorts of institutions. So we are going to see a shift. So if everything stays the same, my prediction is all the money will be spent by the levy payers. It will be on degree and higher apprenticeship stuff. That causes a real issue for the traditional apprenticeship approach, as I said, at the lower levels. And the twin track of productivity and social mobility is sitting there. And I have been at a number of HE conferences where I've been told that moving from a level 5 to a level 7 in management is social mobility. I just don't buy that going from a 3-bedroom house to a 4-bedroom house is social mobility. It's not what we mean by it. What we mean is giving the most disadvantaged the opportunity to get onto that ladder of learning, to get opportunities to get work and progress forward. And so the whole debate is not degree apprenticeships are bad, lower level good. It's about they're all brilliant, who's funding them? Because government is there really to fit the gaps where there's no incentive to fund. And at the higher level, surely there's an incentive for employers and individuals to fund more. And that debate needs to happen because I think we're going to run out of money. So I suppose there's a bit of a warning there of those of you who are looking at apprenticeships, working in the apprenticeship world. I don't think the model as it stands at the moment is sustainable. Basically, any levy payer gets an extra 10% topped up from government, and then if they go over their levy, as long as they provide 10% of the funding, the government give the other 90%. We know in some professions they're shifting all their trainings to apprenticeships and just paying 10%. So non-levy payers, as long as they pay 10%, then they get the government funding for 90%. And that's all got to come out of the £2.5 billion. And we were spending over £1.5 billion before. It's not going to take much to use up that money. So the question is, are the government going to put in more money, or are they going to start rationing in certain areas? And that's the debate I think we need now. So great opportunity. I'm sure we're going to hear some really interesting stuff about what's going on, but also some real challenge about where things are shifting and not leaving the most vulnerable behind. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Julie, my colleague here, Ben, we're from QA. We have been offering degree apprenticeships for the last 2 years. And we just thought we'd give you an opportunity to explain some of the clashes that we've come across as a result of the combination of higher education and apprenticeships. Just to put it into context, just a little bit about QA. We're made up of 4 divisions, and I think in some ways these 4 divisions has helped us in being able to provide these degree apprenticeships. Our learning division is very much a professional CPD type learning environment, almost exclusively client-sponsored, so the delegates are all working, paid for by their employers. We have about 6,000 different clients and about 100,000 different delegates a year going through those courses around the UK. We have a higher education division where we work with 3 university partners. We offer franchise programs, undergraduate and postgraduate, in 3 different locations around the UK, and we run embedded pathway centres for international students. We have about 4,000 higher education students at the moment. And we have an apprenticeship division. The apprenticeship division, working with our clients, we identify the needs for apprenticeships, we find the apprentices, place the 2 together, provide all the training. This year we will have placed our 14,000th apprentice, and so again, a big area for us. Probably less relevant in terms of today, but just for completeness, there's our final division, the consulting division. This is where QA employs STEM graduates, puts them through the QA Academy, which is focused very much on technology training, and then places them as consultants with our clients in various areas of technology. So probably not so relevant in terms of today's discussion. But where did degree apprenticeships end up? So we're still not quite sure is the answer. We have about 400 students currently going through a degree apprenticeship with us, sitting at the moment somewhere between the higher education division and the apprenticeship division.
Thank you. Right, so I think today we're doing a double act partly because of this. So I'm an apprenticeships guy. I've got 15 years experience in apprenticeships. But until 2 years ago, I knew very, very little about higher education. So I've been on a massive learning curve. We'll talk a bit about how we've tried to put that together in a way that makes sense, but also, frankly, share some of the scars of the last 2 years. I think Mark touched a bit of this, but for us, we've gone from a model where apprenticeships was a pot of money that was too small for the job before the levy. And government desperately tried to slow down the spending for employers. So they did that by saying it's only at the lower levels and we're going to then try and squeeze it into younger people wherever possible. But if you're going to take 0.5% of an employer's payroll, you have to fundamentally change the model, and that's what government have done. They've said, 1, you can work right across the age brackets, but also you can work right across the level. And in our context, which is mainly technology from an apprenticeship point of view, but also management. But mainly we're talking about tech jobs, tech and digital, it's a perfect fit because you've got an industry that's got a fundamental skill shortage. It's got the need to open up entry routes at lots of different levels. And then the really key thing is technology moves so fast that just doing a single apprenticeship and then stopping is never going to work. You've got this real lifelong learning message that needs to get into apprenticeships, particularly in tech. And I like the AI talk. That's a great example of how fast things are moving in technology. So the idea that we get people on a lifelong learning journey is vital. We're very much looking at degree apprenticeships being new recruits, but also progressions from lower levels and also career changer options. So people who've been in another career and then switch halfway through. Whoa, those colours have changed.
Sorry?
Those were blue when I sent them.
Sorry. That's how quickly things change.
Oh, sorry. So let's just talk a little bit about our structure, so how we've actually brought this into the world.
Yeah, and as it says, it's a bit of both worlds. We're trying to pull together the sort of expertise that we have from both sides of the business, the higher education side and the apprenticeship side. On the higher education side, the oversight, the registry, the relationship with the university partners and what they expect in terms of a higher education relationship comes from the higher education division. But then on the other side, in terms of front office and also actually the assessment and the oversight of the students has to come very much from the apprenticeship division. And we currently have this degree apprenticeship division that is sort of trying to draw on both things. Luckily, we have the skills of both sides, but still trying to pull them into this middle piece, which is ever changing, especially as we start to move towards level 7. And as Mark was saying about, what spend that's going to, go on to in terms of the delegate and the student changing is proving quite difficult.
I think there's probably two things that if you're starting to get into this world that I'd say two things we did right, and we'll come on to some of the things that we didn't. I think the first thing is we did set this up as a proper skunk works team. So knowing that actually if we tried to do degree apprenticeships but using all of the processes, the rules, really of either division, we'd have got stuck very early into just complying with a load of processes for the sake of complying with them. So I'm very grateful I got a lot of freedom both from Julie and my boss to say, work it out for a year or so and see what it needs to be like. Don't break anything, don't do anything wrong, but you've got the space to really understand the needs of employers and apprentices and put something together that works. I think a big part of that actually was the staffing. Mm-hmm. So we went with a very intentional mix of some academics, so some PhDs, and we've got those, but also a load of people from industry and a load of people from the apprenticeship world. So I liked, dual industry tutors? Mm-hmm. That sort of idea has been really important to us, is that because this is so brand new, there is nobody who's done degree apprenticeships before, and there certainly wasn't 2 years ago. So our best approach was to put a load of people from either worlds in the room together and sort of argue it out and work out somewhere between that we'd find a way through this. And so when you step into that, that's something that's worked pretty well for us. There's obviously a small group now, 2 years in, that have done it, but you can't have them, they're mine. And that is not our library, I'd just like to point out. But I think there really is a fundamental here, is this changes the move from fundamentally students exist in a university or a campus setting to the vast majority of their time is at their workplace, and particularly our customers, our tech employers, that's where they spend 95% of their time on a degree apprenticeship. And so we've got to understand that that's their context all of the time. And what we're trying to do actually is, one, we do look much more, I'd say, like a tech employer than we look like a university campus. But much more importantly is we're trying to really build into the curriculum structured opportunities. They bring their context, both their personal context and their workplace content, into the programme, rather than us saying, no, these are separate, learning's over here and work's over here. So I think that's been really critical for us.
One of the things that is also different in terms of the normal academic calendar that you'd have for higher education, which I think we were lucky to have the advantage of this with our higher education partners. We have 3 intakes a year, so we don't just have the normal standard September start date. We have 3 start dates and therefore 3 sets of exam boards to support those start dates. But this is something else that you have to think through, because the model with degree apprenticeships, because it is driven by the employers, is very much roll on, roll off. So the students don't want to wait till September to start, they want to start next month. So we have to try and have this academic calendar that suits the needs of our employers, and you have to work very closely with your university partners to make sure that they can get their heads around the extra work that's involved with the exam boards to support that. Yeah,
and this was one of the things I definitely didn't get right. I was completely naive as to the idea of putting in, firstly, 4 terms a year, but also roll-on starts. The summer term I partly did just to be able to say, look, we're teaching in the summer and none of the universities are. What I didn't appreciate is what they were doing in the summer was largely running exam boards and progression boards, which I thought they were just doing nothing, and it turns out I was wrong. And so it probably took, probably still in it, certainly 12 to 18 months to work through from this being, I still think it's absolutely core to our employer proposition, is to make sure we do something that fits around them, both because it does fit a real world calendar, but also it's a really important thing is it really evens out the apprentice workload. So rather than having everything into a 30-week calendar, the fact that we can spread it across the year means actually it's got less disruption into a normal work pattern. The reality is then, now we've got into a place where understanding academic regs, how do you do progression from level 4 to level 5, when actually you haven't had time to mark everything because the next term starts 2 weeks later. We've got there, but it was a hell of a challenge to work out actually both an operational model but a kind of sort of academic model that could support it. So that's something that, I can share that. I'm not saying don't do 4 terms a year, but it was a naive first place to start. Is that me, isn't it?
It is.
I'm still talking. I think, and I just wanted to add a couple of other things. I think because QA does come from this fundamental thing of being a B2B training business as where we started, is being very close to our employers and understanding what they wanted. And I think some of the things that we listened to in the early days and then have come out, they have been hard. The first one was the difference with degree apprentices to level 3 first starters is that they've been productive employees from the start. So they said you can't have them out of the workplace in the same proportions you did on a level 3 tech apprenticeship. We've really answered that by moving to much more of a blended learning model. It's been a huge change. They were very keen that they didn't want assessment that felt drastically separate to normal working life. So I think there's been a huge piece of work for us on work-based assessment, which is not just the original design, but then really the staff development of getting our lecturing team to understand how to develop really good work-based assignment models. So I think that's been big. And then the other one is, I guess, particularly in the tech industry, is that real desire for cutting-edge content, both the things that are happening right now, so that's artificial intelligence, big data, cybersecurity, but then also knowing that every single year we're going to have to change that. So we have to change our modules every year, and we're making quite drastic module changes every year. And whilst my associate dean sighs every time I bring him a list of good ideas, actually it's now becoming a really core part of how we do this. I think our partners probably are still in a place where they're getting used to us doing that, but it's something that's hard but critical to meet our employer needs. And then we just want to bring this up. I think it was meant, social mobility came up earlier. I think it's been really important to us that we've set this not as a separate program, but as a part of a kind of overall learning journey. The exciting thing is 2 years in, we've already got some of this coming into reality. So we've got some young people that started as trainees. So trainees is for those that don't have 5 GCSEs A to C. So they started as trainees, they then got jobs, and some of them at places like Accenture, and now in the second year of a degree. I loved what LSBM said earlier, and I wrote it down and underlined it many times, which is, for me, this is really starting to address for those for whom success is not inevitable. To pick up young people who've just left school with less than 5 GCSEs and now to have them in tech jobs doing software development roles and halfway through a degree is a pretty big change for us. And that's our confidence, is knowing that they simply couldn't have done that if we'd had a really separated model of apprenticeships being for those people and degrees being for those people. That really changes it.
I think one of the other things, and I think picking up what Mark said earlier about the level 7 and the spend of the levy, the danger here is that the levy spend will be misspent, if you like, in terms of where it's going to end up. If you think about we've got several thousand clients who we've been talking to over the last 18 months about the levy and how they want to spend the levy, and obviously there is a little bit of confusion about how that's going to work. But the overwhelming feedback is that actually if we can spend our levy at level 7 by retaining our middle management by putting them through a level 7 leadership and management or an MBA, then we'll do that. And that's not really what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about the whole thing. And I think that's something that that's the feedback we're getting now. That will be changing. We'll have to see how that kind of plays out. But it's interesting that it's the higher levels that the levy spenders want to spend their money on, rather than putting it down at the lower levels, which is where it really all began.
Yeah. And I guess final point for us was actually looking at admissions, and I think one of the things we've noticed with, I guess, traditional universities approaching degree apprenticeships is most of them have come to this and said we have to have the same UCAS entry requirements for a degree apprenticeship as we have for our on-campus provision. And I don't think that's right at all, actually, because I think there's a fundamental thing. One, employers are increasingly recruiting now for aptitude and behaviours. There's a real movement in industry to move away from qualifications as an entry requirement, particularly into this world of technology where hardly anyone is doing computing at A-level. And so for us, there's a huge point around social mobility that's saying if we can recruit based on a better set of criteria than your qualifications, then we should do that. And some of that is at entry point, at traditional ages, but also I think for those coming into the tech sector as their second or third career. And that's why we've got this point about experiential learning and CATS credits, is when people enter at that point, they come with all sorts of wild myriad of qualifications. And even over the first 2 years, we found it quite hard to navigate through a traditional university set of rules around that. To say, actually, we don't want you to duplicate content. We don't want you to go back and do something that you already know. But I think there's a bit of a way to go, and I think that will be interesting in the work that the QAA and the Office for Students do about how do you approach degree apprenticeships, where you have this much more diverse set of backgrounds coming into it. It's key for us. We certainly don't have the answer fully, but I think I'm encouraged by the move towards contextual admissions, and I think that's something in this sector we can use when you've got places like the University of Bristol who are, top 30, starting to take a really serious look at contextual admissions and saying we understand that if you went, frankly, to a really bad school, you're less likely to have 2 A's and a B, is a start, and the sort of thing that we could start doing in degree apprenticeships to say, let's move it away from the number of UCAS points you carry in and move it more towards the person that's applying for this. So that's really key for us and something, as you can tell, quite passionate about.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you very much. So it's great to see hands up right away. We'll take a question here and then we'll come across to you, John. Ruth, do you want to come down to the middle there? And then we'll come across to Icon. Great.
Hi, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. Can I just ask, do you have any comments on Udacity-type micro degrees, both from the perspective of whether they're a practical solution within technology specifically, and secondly, are they reconcilable with high HE academic frameworks and that kind of thing? I mean, can it be done?
What a great question. Yeah, it is interesting actually. In a sense, I think those micro degrees are much more focused at just getting someone a first step on the ladder. Just get, they are short, and they can never give you the same depth, I think, as not necessarily just what we do, but part of the joy of apprenticeships is that magic of applied learning, is that throughout the whole apprenticeship you are in work, you've got the job, you're getting the experience that we could never provide because you're in role. So there is that. I think they are, though, the best thing about things like Udacity and the digital learning is it's really driving, I think, a new way of thinking about how we teach and learn. For us, that's now the fact that I think most education providers have been focused on content. Overwhelmingly, that's what we thought about, whether it was books, courseware, handouts. And the thing they've done brilliantly, actually, is make content, it's a commodity now. And so to realise we can't compete directly with these video-based learning platforms like Udacity or Pluralsight. And it's really moved our teaching and learning approach onto how do we provide challenge. Things like problem-based learning and challenge-based learning are very exciting, but really trying to make sure that we do things uniquely that we can do, as opposed to just focusing on the sort of content, because people can get that from anywhere.
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the switch from frameworks to standards and apprenticeships actually is a switch from an assessment-based approach during the apprenticeship to a training-based approach. And actually, a lot of the providers we talk to, the relationship with the employers suddenly changed because there are these standards, but the standards are quite widely defined, and the employer can say, well, actually, this is the sort of training I want to see, and it can be mapped to those standards. So employer by employer, if you want, you can have your own program pulling in all sorts of material, just depending what's right for that employer and those employees and the provider. So there's a lot more opportunity to develop the relationship with the employer that actually delivers what they want rather than set quotes. Yeah, framework is a dangerous word to use in apprenticeship. So the standards, the standard is fixed, but it's quite open as to what can be delivered.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to come down to John, and then we've got here, and then we'll come back this way. Stefan, just great.
One of the things about higher education that I find interesting is how we always sort of reproduce things. I mean, there's been a great deal of work done by Foundation Degree Forward a number of years ago, which promoted foundation degrees, which is one of the big innovation in terms of work-based learning, working with employers. There's a lot of research, a lot of work done by academics and employers about how you bring together the world of workplace training and higher education. Also, places like Middlesex University, the Center for Work-Based Learning, and other universities, again, a lot of research, international research on work-based learning, the links between higher education and employers in terms of work-based learning degrees. And finally, something I was also involved with called when we had lifelong learning networks, which is all about vocational progression to higher education, rethinking admissions to higher education. What are the requirements? And this included University of London colleges that were part of the London Lifelong Learning Network. So there's a lot of knowledge and expertise out there that I think sometimes we ignore because we always want to reinvent the wheel. But my question to you is going to sound like a very traditional conservative academic question, which is this distinction, which, look, I started my career at the LSE, which didn't even allow me to do internships because experiential learning I didn't say the LSE. I taught at a research-based college which didn't believe in experiential learning at the time. So how do you answer this question? To what extent are degree apprenticeships degrees? To what extent, how do you measure the quality of the learning outcomes? And to what extent is that quote unquote of degree level? And I mean that as a positive question, not a negative question.
Let me kick off in a sort of broad policy sense. And there's a worrying tendency, I think, when something's created for everyone to try and cram in what they've already been doing into that. So we see some universities flipping their degrees into degree apprenticeships and saying it's an apprenticeship. And that's one of the things we're challenging because it is a job. It's on-the-job training with a bit of, at the moment, 20% off the job, so a day a week on the sort of away from being productive, is how it's sort of phrased. So you're learning 20% of the time. So it's very different. And part of the argument I was discussing earlier about Ofsted and QAA is Ofsted go in and look at what's going on in the employer's premises and see how the on-the-job is contributing to the learning, and that doesn't feel like the system that currently exists in the higher education sector.
And I think if you look at work-based learning and some of the foundation degree programs, that economy you're positing right now is just not true. I think you're misunderstanding a lot of innovation in higher education.
Well, I was a college principal and I saw foundation degrees come in and I didn't see proper work-based learning happening there. So I think there's good practice and bad practice. And I get university vice chancellors saying to me, that lot down the road are not doing what apprenticeship should be. So there's a debate to be had about what is good quality. And it is about that flexibility you've been hearing about as well. It's roll on, roll off. It's about meeting the needs of those employers while giving a broader occupational learning as well. There's a whole range of things that are really positive. And the standard setting, trailblazers are there, universities have been involved in it and saying this is a level 6 level of learning and they're challenged if it's not there. So there's a lot of work going on up front to set the standard levels.
Yeah. And for me, the best thing about degree apprenticeships and the change it's made from an apprenticeship point of view is that it's not equivalent to a degree, it's not a bit like a degree, it is a degree. And so they come out with a BSc in the same way as they have a different learning model, but the standards, the regulatory model, everything else stays the same. And that has really changed this. It was always very frustrating to have to go, level 4 apprenticeship is a bit like the first year of a degree, whereas now I think we fundamentally moved it on. The bad thing, Mark brought up the bad thing about having identical degrees on campus recycled as degree apprenticeships. But the interesting thing when I go and then talk to my peers in the traditional universities, they come to these meetings and they go, you wouldn't believe this, the degree apprentices are outperforming the on-campus students.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I would. Because they've got a job. That's the fundamental difference, is they get immediate reapplication. Instead of, and we know students work, but the reality is they very rarely work in a related career during their studies. And that's what we're creating for them, is that guarantee, the hard wiring between work and a degree is the real,
and the employers love it. There are certain sectors, like I was talking about engineering, accounting, they say they've been waiting for years for this to happen because they want them at 18, they want them in the workplace learning on their machines, learning their way, as well as getting that broader knowledge. So we're seeing big shifts in some sectors, and IT as well.
Yeah, tech's huge.
Yeah.
We've got a couple more questions. We'll come here first, and then over here, and then we'll come over here.
My name is Professor Nabi from Icon College. Thank you very much. It is a wonderful presentation about apprenticeship. I can confirm the conference that as a member of London Chamber of Commerce, corporate member, our members mostly like apprenticeship graduate for their employment rather than university. But I am a university graduate, I am not against the university. My question is, you have better setting admission criteria. I'm asking you, as a principal earlier, do QA understand this better setting? They have some preconceived idea when they visit us, okay? And you have 14,000 apprenticeship students, am I correct? And can you please let us know what are the success rate of 14,000 students? And if possible, please, according to sector like business, computing, engineering, music, art and science. Thank you.
I'll take the stats question.
Go on then.
Do you want to take is it the first question was about admission? It was about
Better setting admission. Do QA like it? There's some QA have some guideline, either GCSE or A level,
right.
but you have the better setting for non-traditional student or school leaver and college leavers. There is a misunderstanding we are facing between QA and universities, part-time students, and alternative providers.
so
This is a very
maybe it's-
critical question.
Let me,
Maybe it's me,
so,
maybe it's
so
me.
there's no...
There should be
there's
somebody
no-
from the QA.
Let's be clear, there's no entry requirement, okay? There's no actual entry requirement. So they're in a job, and the employer can say, I think they're working at this level, and a provider will come in, and the idea now will be an initial assessment to say, yep, it looks like they're probably at that level, and this is the journey they're going to have to go on to get through this apprenticeship. We can provide it in the funding that's available, and the training, the standard that's available, and we can get them through to that point. They can have nothing. There is no entry requirement at any level of apprenticeship. Now, clearly, providers will have their own criteria that they'll be applying, but it could be anyone.
Yeah, and I think that we work very closely with the employers in terms of what their requirements are, what is it specifically that they're looking for. It goes back to Ben's point about it's more about the individual rather than what they've got on a piece of paper in terms of their qualification. So we will interview all of these potential students, potential apprentices, and we will place them into interviews with their potential employers. And as Mark says, it's not necessarily based on what their academic qualifications are. There has to be a very a basic level, obviously, in terms of functional skills, which is just required. But apart from that, it's more about what the employer wants than anything else.
But my question, do QA understand?
do we understand admissions? Oh, QAA. Sorry, that's always confusing when you talk about QA apprenticeships.
Yeah, sorry.
We run a counselling college and we let people in without 5 GCSEs because not everybody who makes a good counsellor has got an academic.
Yep.
Some people haven't finished school
Mhm.
and the QAA don't mind.
Mhm.
Yeah, so how, I think,
And that's been a yeah, and I agree, and that's I understand now. Yeah.
And according to sector.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, and that's a really helpful example, is that we do have more entry requirements for people who want to go direct to a degree apprenticeship. I think that's key, but actually for us, we want to create this pathway where people can come in at whichever stage suits them, and for us to say, it doesn't matter that you're coming in on a level 3 apprenticeship, we can show you a real straight line through to degree apprenticeship if that's where you want to go. So that's been it for us.
And we have this year is the first year where we've had students come in through level 3 who are now going on to do their masters at level 7, which is fantastic.
Yeah, which is great. And you asked about stats.
I think maybe if we can save the stats maybe for a conversation after.
That's very good.
I'm just conscious of the rest of the questions that we've got in the room. We've only got 4 minutes, so we'll take this question here and then we'll walk over to Marcel after that. We can have time for afterwards.
Over 80% achievement on all apprenticeships. 97% of our 400 degree apprentices have been retained, and their average grade is 65 after.
And sector-wise business company.
We can do this afterwards. Okay, I'm just wary of
It's mostly technology.
Okay.
So, hello, I'm Tim Stewart from BPP University. We're in a similar situation to you. We've provided apprenticeships for 10 years and degrees for 10 years under our own degree awarding powers. And we've also been trying to formulate degree apprenticeships as its own entity. I was quite interested in what you said about sort of combining people with academic PhD backgrounds and sort of people who've come from skills coaching backgrounds and them all sort of fighting it out. One of the things I suppose I believe very strongly is that we should get to a point where there's a much more sort of coherent team that can actually speak to the whole thing. Yeah. So you have people who understand about the FHEQ, they know the QAA benchmark, but they also know what the world of work looks like. You know, they understand the pedagogy of work-based learning, and they design a program that is completely coherent to all of those things. And that to me strikes me as where we should be, rather than this sort of assembly of people with completely different backgrounds who don't really relate to one another, and you create a sort of more Frankenstein sort of monster of a thing. Is that what you're seeing in your new division, that you're getting to a team that can speak to everything?
Yeah, I think I'm also realistic about how long that takes. I think the idea that we could have done that in 2 years is probably over the top.
It's also changing as well. So I think it's fair to say we didn't get it right the first time, and that's why I think we've got this mix of all these people who've got all of the different bits of knowledge, but it does seem to be evolving, and we seem to be getting there in terms of what it's going to look like. And of course, as the volume of apprentices degree apprenticeships grows, that whole division I can see as a separate division, rather than being a little bit of the overlap of the two in the middle as it is at the moment. Yeah. It's a difficult one.
They are unique individuals though, aren't they? That academic employment divide and straddling too, and I think as the volumes go up, the sector as a whole is going to have more and more difficulty getting the right people to fulfil those roles.
I think there are some things that we've found really are working as they are and have become our thing. So we talked about, I mentioned challenge-based learning. That's come as something that I didn't know about 2 years ago, but we've discovered it, had it brought to us and going, actually, this is perfect. This is a methodology that fundamentally works as a pedagogy for degree apprenticeship. So let's adopt it and let's go after it. And that now helps because we're, the size of the degree apprenticeship team will probably double in the next 6 months. We're now in that place where we need to be able to say, this is how we do things, as opposed to let's all have a chat and work it out as we go. We can't really do that.
And Tim, what about you? What have you done at BPP in terms of where have you got yours from?
Yeah, so I think we're trying to get faster to that point where somebody can actually speak to all of those elements with a client and also develop a program and be very familiar with all the various variables. As you say, there are not many people who sit in that particular space, but it strikes me that is the space rather than the combination of very different people speaking different languages with different values. And I think that is really the key to making a success of degree apprenticeships.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to take one last question from Marcella in the corner, and then we'll have to bring it to a close, and we'll have to skip my interactive session, which everyone's definitely disappointed by.
Thanks. I'm Marcella from Hot Courses. So what we're seeing from a lot of prospective students that are coming onto the likes of What Uni and Complete University Guide is they want information about degree apprenticeships, but are very confused about how to apply. Do they apply to the employer? Do they apply to the provider? You mentioned contextual admissions, which for us is quite difficult to convey that in a kind of course search or helpful place. And I guess my question is, firstly, who does the book stop with? Who ultimately makes the decision on a student? And how do you see that relationship between employer and provider changing as more students not in the pathway, i.e. not doing a level 3 or 4, who are comparing a traditional degree with the degree apprenticeship? How do you see that message being conveyed to them in a way they'll understand?
So I think it's fair to say that so far all of the degree apprentices have come from the client. So the client has driven that. The client has come to us and said, we want to put 20 students through a degree apprenticeship. We've then gone out and found the apprentices and run the programme. So certainly it's been very much client-led at the moment. It was an interesting discussion we only had this morning actually about when we get to this being more, I suppose seeing it as more of a public programme rather than a client programme, how do we get that route to people that want to do the degree apprenticeships? And it's something that we haven't really fully worked out yet. I think, that, as I say, currently they are coming through that client, and with the levy, that's kind of pushed that even more so in terms of being client-driven. And it's something that we do need to work on in terms of how do we get to those students that want to go through a degree apprenticeship. I mean, we obviously go through the normal marketing that we have in terms of getting to apprentices, in terms of, don't we, do you want to be an apprentice rather than go to university? And that will be all the normal schools outreach and the marketing that we would do that way. And I think it's trying to expand that message, isn't it, within the concept of the degree as well.
Yeah, and I think the nature of apprenticeships there hasn't been a UCAS for apprenticeships. I mean, Naz will tell you the apprenticeship vacancies is, but it only makes up about a third of where people apply. It's a much more, the market for getting on an apprenticeship is much more like just getting a job, where there's 20, 25 job boards that we have to use, and we sort of act as an aggregator, but we'll never make the decision. All we're doing is providing help, particularly to small employers for whom they can't do this on their own, but if they have some help shortlisting candidates, but it must always be an employer that selects the person because it's a job.
So if we let UCAS get their hands on this, it'll be a disaster and it'll kill it. All right. So there's and yeah, I can.
Thanks, Mark.
Because it is every day, and it is actually getting employment. And I think your point is it's employer driven. The apprenticeship service does set out all the opportunities, but Rolls-Royce get 2,500 applicants for 100 places and that. So there's the issue with a system is that all those people that didn't get to Rolls-Royce, at least show them what the other opportunities are. But what we're also seeing in our membership and in the sector is more recruitment companies coming into this world and saying, actually, it's part of our complete offer. So they go to the employers and say, we will recruit these individuals and then we will get them onto apprenticeship and we will help the delivery of training and development. So you're actually seeing a sort of talent, whole talent strategy organisations coming in teaching. There's a couple of new members we've got, and their whole thing has been teacher training and recruitment, and now they're driving apprenticeships because they can see there's a real opportunity there. So you're going to see the market shift and the competition become very interesting at all levels, I think. It is.
I'd echo that. We've certainly noticed that a lot of universities over the past 6 months, both traditional and non, are looking at degree apprenticeships, but there is mass confusion as to who markets them and how students get onto them. And I think that will be the next challenge. And I think we run the risk of comparing traditional degree courses with degree apprenticeships. They're both very different experiences, and the outcomes may look different over different levels of time.
They must have a job, and you've got to have an employer to give them a job. So you've got to have that relationship with the employer before you can even offer one. QA can't go out selling loads of apprenticeships if there are no jobs for those individuals to do it.
I think what's really interesting as well is in terms of, historically, if you want to work with a university, you have to go out, you have to go and try and build relationships, you have to convince the university they want to work with you if you're in the private sector. This has really changed things round. We've been approached by lots of universities coming to QA saying, you've got 6,000 employers out there, can we work with you because you've got the route to the students? So it is interesting how that sort of, the universities, as you say, they've obviously got the power to create the programmes, but their route to actually get them to the students is proving quite difficult. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to bring us to a close because we're a little bit over time already, and I'm standing between the break between you and drinks, and I don't want to do that. So thank you very much to our panellists, particularly our last ones who have certainly ignited the room. And thank you to all our presenters. For those of you who are providers in the room, if you'd like to get involved, next conference we'll be doing this again, so please do let us know your best practice. We integrate this into a lot of the work that we do in our staff networks and in our workshops. So we're always looking for the stories that you have about the great things that you do. And I'm very grateful to the four people who came to speak today, 4 groups that came to speak today, for both sharing their stories early so I could prompt them to come along to the conference, but also for coming to share them with you. So we're now going to move into a break. For those of you who are staying with us for dinner, we'll be starting drinks again at 6 o'clock. If you're not sure whether you're staying for dinner or not, you can ask the people at the reception desk, and they'll let you know whether you have a dinner ticket, and you're welcome to come and stay for dinner. And we'll be doing our awards this evening, the first ever IHE Awards, which I'm sure will share more best practice about the sector. So thank you again for staying with us till the end of today.